listening to The Betmaker Show. This is the college football betting odds preview for Thursday, August 8th, 2019. And now, live from Las Vegas, the host of The Betmaker Show, Brian Blessing.
All right, folks, we love talking college football. Another conference preview for you. We are focusing on the Mid-American Conference, the MAC. MAC action, Brian Blessing in Las Vegas, and no one better to talk to about this conference than our fountain of information. The one, the only, Bruce Marshall from the Gold Sheet. I love the MAC, Bruce. You got the MAC and the Sun Belt, smaller, middle-tier conferences, Bruce, but I think these are important previews and things to talk about. People should pay attention to these guys right out of the gate because just human nature, we get to the back third of the season, they're going to be playing weeknight nationally televised games. So why not be on top of these guys early when you know you're going to play them later?
I agree, Brian, and we've been talking about that for a couple of years because once we get into, like past the World Series, then it's a great last month of the season. It's Tuesday, Wednesday. It's every night. Thursday, every night of the week, we got some MAC games there. That is not great for the schools, by the way. The fans hate it, especially the fans who like to travel between the games. But it's all done for TV, and that's what it is. But we get to watch them a lot. And one more thing, though. You usually find some point spread angles worth exploiting, good and bad, each season in the MAC. You can bet these games, too, and there's teams that win and lose. So there's some angles to be found and some teams to follow, go with, and go against.
And clearly, when you're talking a Tuesday or a Wednesday night game, sometimes there are scheduling situations, some teams with shorter weeks than others, and things you got to pay attention to. A brief overview, Bruce, and then we'll dive into specific teams. One thing we should note about the MAC, it's very tough to repeat as champion, and it's not good news for Northern Illinois. But the one thing we know, boy, when you get to bowl season, they ain't good. 16-46 straight up in bowls the last 11 years.
Yeah, they really have taken their licks in the bowl games, and only on a few occasions have they stepped up. And I think, what you've gotten in MAC generally is a lot of polarization. There is a wide gap between the haves and have-nots in this league, and sometimes the haves then get exposed in bowl action. Function of the matchups too, but the bad teams are usually bad in the MAC, and we've got several new coaches in here this year who are trying to turn things around, so it makes it a little bit more intriguing than usual in the MAC. Let's go to
Akron. We'll start in the East. We go alphabetically. Akron, Bruce, we got a new head coach coming up from the D3 ranks. Might take a while for Tom Arth to put his stamp on this program. The one thing he does inherit is a pretty good defense.
Yeah, defense not too bad. That's one thing that Terry Bowden left over there, though they've got some replacing to do there. But the defense, 8 starters are gone, but the defense did fare, pretty well for a MAC team to rank 61st nationally in total defense. The way they whip the ball, and you're right. Comes in now. Nearby product, John Carroll University up in Cleveland, which is the alma mater of one Josh McDaniels of the New England Patriots. So Arth, he's young. He had been at Chattanooga before, and he had won there. So he's got some history of winning. He's got a quarterback who makes some things happen. Cato Nelson, kind of a live wire, and most all the receivers are back from last year. So I'm not sure they back up from that 4-8 last year. The non-conference schedule not all that difficult, and with a live wire quarterback and a coach who I think has got some spark to him, Akron might be one of these teams flying under the radar. Keep an eye on the Zips.
All right, Bowling Green. I don't know what we do with this. 9 wins the last 3 years. You get a new head coach and a quarterback that hit the bricks.
Yeah, and there's a lot of warning signs here at Bowling Green. You mentioned the downturn they had the last few years. Mike Jinks, who is now back as an assistant at USC, and that's more his role where he should be as an assistant. He was not cut out to be a head coach. He was not able to sustain the momentum this program had for Dino Babers a few years ago. More than anything, the offense really fell off the map. They couldn't run the ball. Now, they could throw the ball a bit, but there's the other problem. Jared Dagey, the quarterback, who was expected to be the centerpiece for the Falcons this year, transferred out after spring. He's at West Virginia now. So looking for a quarterback at Bowling Green. They've got a new coach, Scott Loeffler, who I am not all that high on. Now, maybe he's one of these guys who works better as a head coach than as an assistant. But very stodgy offenses in recent years at Boston College. They were a run-first offense there with Steve Adazio. Virginia Tech, very, very questionable offenses there. He was at Auburn for Gene Chiswick last year, which was a disaster, and he had been with Adazio before at Temple. But that was when he sort of did his best work, and that's 7-8 years ago now when he was at Temple the first time with Adazio. I don't know that Leff was the guy to turn this around, and with Iggy leaving, I think it could be more L's for Bowling Green.
Buffalo's an intriguing team. Regression certainly makes sense. They lose their quarterback, Tyree Jackson, their stud wide receiver, well coached by Lance Leopold. 10 wins last year, 6.5 the season win total this year. The one thing I think we should watch for here, Bruce, they got a three-headed monster going. I don't know if it's a monster, but they got a quarterback battle going on, trying to find the new quarterback for this program. But they get a really solid offensive line with really good running backs returning. I would look for Buffalo to be an under team this year. I think this would be a run and stop the run kind of team.
Yeah, Patterson is a 1,000-yard runner. They've got back, and they may be able to try to build the offense around him. You're right. They're looking for a new quarterback here, but they've got three guys in there to take the place of Tyree Jackson, who was really quite a threat in the MAC the last few years. And, they've got a few guys who are trying to plug in. You mentioned Lance Leopold, and I think this is the ace in the hole here for Buffalo. He posted winning numbers at Wisconsin Whitewater before he got here, like Gino Auriemma at UConn. It was unbelievable. This team's hardly ever lost. And since he has turned this thing around, and it was a real rebuild, he took over at Buffalo. They've been pretty dangerous. They've gone to bowl games. Last year, this team was awfully fun to watch and kicking itself for losing a couple of games late in the year. But Leopold is the guy you want to back here, and I think because of him, Buffalo could probably get back into a bowl, especially if they figure out what to do at quarterback.
Yeah, and the one thing about him, even with a high-flying offense, he was still a conservative coach. I can't tell you how many games, Bruce, they'd be tilting the field on teams, and he'd get the ball back with a minute and a half to go in the first half and have the ball at the 40, and he'd kneel down. And he had teams on the run.
Yep.
So he's a conservative coach to begin with, and I do think they're going to have to rely on the running game. Let's go to Kent State. And Sean Lewis has a good offense and a bad defense and a very tough schedule. The one thing I would say here is they can score. They can't stop anybody. I'm looking at Kent State to be playing them. Generally speaking, the starting point for me would be to play them over the total on a weekly basis.
Yeah, and they've got a quarterback in Woody Barrett who came in last year and put up some decent numbers, and he figures to do a little bit more damage this year, transferred in from Auburn, and he can put that. By the way, Auburn is on the schedule this year, as is Arizona State. You mentioned that, so that's a pretty tough road in the first two of the first three games, and they're going to Wisconsin a couple of weeks later. So, Arizona State, Auburn, Wisconsin, three bowl teams on the road. So Kent State's going to take its lumps. Now, Sean Lewis, the coach, though, we mentioned Barrett a second ago. He has installed the same sort of offense that got up at Syracuse that Dino Babers is running, because that's where he came from. So they are pretty lively, and they are going to try to do some different things using Barrett as their fulcrum there. They don't have a lot of defense. They're in triple digits all the way across the board, and they're going to take their lumps in some of those non-conference games. So you have to wonder if this team's going to be beaten up by the time it gets to midseason and what they're going to have left down the stretch. I
love it. Fulcrum in a college conference preview. Very good. You are you are the wordsmith of this industry. The point on which a lever rests or is supported and or which it pivots. I learned stuff from you, Bruce. I love this, baby.
The MAC, yeah. Fulcrum's in the MAC. There you go.
Miami. Hey, they got it going late last year. Offense was on the improve. It was senior laden, and I don't know who the quarterback is.
Yeah, they're going to have to find a new quarterback here, and Chuck Martin, who kind of needed to win some games down the stretch, maybe to save his job last year, and he did. They got to 6-6. They were bowl eligible, but they were one of those handful of teams that did not. They did not get a bowl invitation. A lot of players have left, like you said, especially on offense. Only 4 starters back. They need another quarterback to come in there. They are 16-6 though, their last 22 MAC games. So Martin has generally done business in the conference, and much like Kent State a moment ago, non-conference schedule, very rough. at Iowa, at Cincinnati, which is a local rivalry, and that is one of the longest rivalries in the country. But Cincinnati won 11 games last year, and by the way, then Ohio State after that. So they're looking at taking their lumps before they get into conference play too, and it's tough with trying to break in a new quarterback. An incoming freshman named Brett Gabbert, whose brother Blaine is an NFL quarterback. We'll talk about him later in the season. He might be the guy to trigger this offense, but he is coming in there new. So it looks like Miami might struggle. And for Chuck Martin, I'm not sure he can afford dropping to 4-8 or 3-9 this year. His job could be on the line.
Ohio 3-1 to win the MAC. Tougher schedule. They face 6 bowl teams. This program's played in bowls 10 of the last 11 years. Youth likely to be served a bit this year. But simply put, a wager on Ohio is a wager on Frank Solich, the head coach, who knows what he's doing.
Yeah, he does. And boy, you look at all these MAC programs, and it's a stopping point for a lot of guys up and or down the scale, up and down the coaching ranks and the coaching ladder. But this one has worked out great. Solich and Ohio were a perfect marriage, perfect point in Solich's career where he really didn't want to go anywhere else, and he's into his 70s now. But he knows what he's doing. He's marinated in the Nebraska system. He, of course, succeeded Tom Osborne there. He played for Bob Devaney, he coached there for almost 40 years as a head coach the last several years there, and didn't do all that bad at Nebraska. He's done well at Ohio. They were one of these MAC teams that actually won a bowl game last year, and in style, 27-0 over San Diego State. And he has maybe the MAC MVP coming in, and Nathan Rourke, the quarterback, dual threat, very exciting. He ran for almost 900 yards last year, passed for 23 touchdowns. He might be the player of the year in the MAC. The defense returned 7 starters from a pretty decent unit, allowed only 24 points per game, and that was in the top third in the country in scoring defense. This is the team to beat in the east of the MAC. I think it's the best team in the MAC overall. And you look at the schedule. I mean, if they could win these couple of road games at Pitt and Marshall, I mean, there's a chance they could have a really big year. And Solich is still pushing those win buttons there in Athens, Ohio. So watch these guys.
Betmaker, let's make some money tonight.
For outstanding information and special offerings and promotions, we invite you and encourage you to sign up for our newsletter today simply by going to the website at betmaker.com. All right, let's move to the West in the MAC with Bruce Marshall. Brian Blessing, glad to be with you. And we'll start with Ball State. Tough schedule in the middle of the season for this group, and that could be tough sledding. And the one thing you should note when you're considering Ball State, especially at home, they don't get much crowd support, Bruce, so it's not much of a home field advantage.
Yeah, and they're there in Muncie, and they don't seem to get a lot of support. Well, it hasn't helped that they aren't winning too much there. We talk about coaches who are on a little bit of the hot seat. Mike New would definitely be that guy here. Now, he does have roots at the school, but that can only go so far. He's 10-26 in 3 years. His quarterback, Riley Neal, transferred out and is now at Vanderbilt. So that is a knock, although they do have a lot of starters back, 9 on offense, 9 on defense. He's going to have to get some better production, though. All the way around on offense, they ranked 100th in scoring last year. That's not all that good. They do like the receivers, but the line play has been spotty. They were ranked 120th versus the rush last year, and that move to the 3-4 defense didn't help New out. He is under some pressure there. And by the way, not only Neal, but James Gilbert is top rusher, transferred out too, and Gilbert's at Kansas State. So they were hit hard by the grad transfer thing, and Ball State could be in some trouble this year.
All right, Bruce, we talk about Central Michigan. One win last year, horrible offense. But the big news, big name comes in, Jim McElwain. It's going to take some time. One would think he's going to attract some name recruits. He does have some experience coming back, but most of it's bad. Yeah,
and you're right. Most of it's bad, and that's not all that good. And his quarterback, the guy who might, who they thought was going to be his signal caller, Lazaro. Thankfully, Quentin Dormady transfers in here from Tennessee, and looks like he's going to be the quarterback. In fact, I'd be shocked if he's not. And that is point one about what you're talking about with McElwain. He's going to be able to attract some guys on the bounce coming back Some of these guys he may have recruited while he was at Florida, and they went elsewhere, and maybe they haven't gotten as much playing time. But a guy like Dormady had his relationship with Mac before, and Coach Mac, and now he shows up at Mount Pleasant. In McElwain's case, you have to look back for him, maybe the Colorado State example as opposed to the Florida example, when expectations were out through the roof at Florida, and he didn't really live up to them. Colorado State, nobody was expecting much, and he did a really good job there. He has roots as a Nick Saban assistant. That should be in his favor. And if Dormady comes in here and does some things, I could actually see Central Michigan becoming a decent point spread value this year. They're going to be way undervalued with some of these games at Wisconsin, at Miami early on, Miami, Florida, that is. But don't underestimate McElwain in this role, especially if Dormady gives him some production at quarterback. So this could be a definite under-the-radar point spread play, and keep an eye on McElwain.
We talk about Eastern Michigan, Bruce. Creighton, head coach here, has an improving defense, and it's a team that plays close games and even bolster the D, and he's done this in the past. He's got 5 JUCOs coming in to help on that defense, but they got a tough road schedule. Yikes.
Yeah, and there they are off the bat. Now, they might be able to handle Coastal Carolina, then at Kentucky, at Illinois. They did go into Purdue last year and win, though, and they should have won at San Diego State. Now, with a little bit more experienced team than last year. But they'll have a puncher's chance. Now, here's a coach, much like Lance Leopold we talked about at Buffalo a moment ago when we talked in their Eastern MAC preview. Chris Creighton, along the same lines. He's won everywhere he has been at lower levels, including at Drake. And to do what he's done here and to kind of stabilize this thing at in Ypsilanti there is something special. I mean, you talk about a program with no support and that is really performing in a vacuum. It's Eastern, but they got to a bowl game last year. They did lose a close one to Georgia Southern, which is a pretty dicey, pretty gnarly team, and no shame there. Creighton knows what he's doing. His quarterback, Mike Glass, split time last year. Now he's the guy, and I mean, he threw for 9 touchdowns, only 1 pick last year when he was splitting times. The former JUCO transfer is pretty good, so they've got a quarterback they can rely on and a coach who's pretty darn good. I like Eastern Michigan. They've been a very good point spread play, by the way, the last couple of years, especially on the road and especially as an underdog. So this is another one of these teams, one of these hidden nuggets the last few years in the MAC.
Defending champion Northern Illinois gets a new head coach in Thomas Hammock with assistant experience at Wisconsin, Minnesota, even the Baltimore Ravens. His quarterback sticks around, Bruce. The running backs are here. The top 4 tacklers return. And out of the gate, though, look at this. At Utah, at Nebraska, at Vandy. And the good news is 32-15-1 against the spread on the road the last 48 games.
Yeah, and that, though, is all done with Rod Carey as the head coach, and he's moved on to Temple. Hammock used to be a running back here, so it's sort of like a homecoming for him, and he's had a pretty decorated assistant record. But, when guys jump up from being a career assistant, now you're the head guy running a program, the transition isn't always that easy. And I'm going to keep an eye on this situation and wondering if Hammock is going to be able to sustain at least some of that point spread success that Carey did. And Carey pretty much kept this team above water, and they've been going to bowl games in recent years. They did lose that game to UAB last year in Boca Raton, but they keep going to bowl games. They've got 7 starters back, both offense and defense. Childers, you mentioned him, the quarterback, is sort of a playmaker. Ross Bowers is a transfer who comes in from Cal 2 years ago. The Golden Bears thought he was going to be their future at quarterback. It didn't work out for him there, so he has cycled back, and now you'll see him at Northern Illinois this year. My question is about Hammock. He's replacing a pretty good mid-level coach in Carey, and he is unproven in this role. So I'm not sure I'm bullish on Northern Illinois, though they have some returning weapons to make us think they could have a chance if Hammock knows how to push the right buttons.
Bruce, we move on to Toledo, where Jason Crandall's got himself an offense that's capable of big numbers.
He does. And, last year they scored better than 40 points per game. And, down the stretch last year, I mean, here's one of these midweek MAC specials. Once we get into late October and November, we'll be seeing a lot of these guys on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And, man, they put up some points last year down the stretch, 51, 45, 56, 51. That's scoring in the last half of the season. Early in the season, 63 at home against Nevada, 52 against Bowling Green. So you get the idea. Kendall knows what he's doing. He is probably the next coach to come up out of the MAC. Now, his predecessor, Matt Campbell, done a pretty good job at Iowa State. So if Kendall has a big year, I could see him being on a short list and moving up to one of these openings. You mentioned the offense. They've got 8 starters back. Udagny, the quarterback, was pretty good last year. And, and Peters, his other quarterback, he's got 2 quarterbacks he can use, and both of them are capable. That offense, like we said, scored 40 per game last year. They got into a lot of ping pong matches, so the defensive numbers look worse than they really were. But the schedule is interesting. By the way, they go into Kentucky in that opening game. We'll talk about that one more toward the end of the month here, but Kentucky's got a very poor record as a favorite in Lexington. They're going to be laying a lot of points, and Toledo won't be a lot of points. Toledo will be a dog, though, so that might be a good underdog play right off the bat with the Rockets.
And we wrap up the MAC with Bruce Marshall. I will say this, Bruce, I hate the V word, value. There's no value in ripping up a ticket, but I will say this. I think it's 6-1. Western Michigan, big opportunity to win the MAC. Most experienced team in the country. Lester's a solid recruiter. And his quarterback, Boisink's back from an ankle injury, and when he got hurt, they were on a dead run. And, oh, by the way, 14 seniors are slated to start. What's not to like?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Tim Lester is the other coach here along with Kendall. It's going to be Toledo or Western Michigan, I think, in the West. And Lester, with a big year, could follow his predecessor, P.J. Fleck, to a Power 5 job if they can put forth a big year. And this would have to be it. It's going to have to happen this year for them, but it might. You mentioned Wasink. If you can keep him healthy, he is a real dual threat there. He can run. He's tough-minded. He's got a good arm, and he's got a top-notch running back to balance things out in Levante Bellamy, who went for almost 1,300 yards last year. So they do have balance. They've got plenty of experience. They've got all these seniors now. They got involved again in a few of these back and forth games last year, and the defense leaked a little bit more than it should. But they do have 10 starters back, and there's a lot of familiarity on that side. So that alone should suggest Western is a team to watch. 18 total starters back, and like you said, that is a pretty big load. We'll get a better idea with them in September. They go to Michigan State for game 2. That could be interesting. If Michigan State is down a bit, Western will give them a shot there, and they'll be up at Dino Babers in Syracuse a couple of weeks later. Watch these guys and watch Coach Lester maybe moving on after the season to a better job, because Western's going to win plenty of games this year.
And watch and listen for more great information from our good friend Bruce Marshall from The Gold Sheet. Brian Blessing, there you have it. It's a preview of Mid-American Conference.
Betmaker, let's make some money tonight.
Well, that's the Betmaker Show for now. We publish multiple times each week. We'd like to thank you for listening, and if you liked what you heard, please take a moment to leave a rating and review, or subscribe to our show feed, or share our show with a friend or two and help us grow the show. We very much appreciate it. Visit us on the web at betmaker.com. And reminder to sign up for the newsletter. Thanks to our engineer, Darren Vandermolen, and producer, Mike Gallivan. The Betmaker Show is a production of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated. Betmaker is a registered trademark. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this content without the express written consent of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated is strictly prohibited.
The handicapping and sports odds information contained on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Please confirm the wagering regulations in your jurisdiction, as they vary from state to state, province to province, and country to country. Using this information to contravene any law or statute is prohibited. The podcast is not associated with, nor is it endorsed by any professional or collegiate league, association, or team. This podcast does not target and is not intended for an audience under the age of 18. If you think that you have a gambling addiction, stop this podcast now and please seek help.
Gambling and betting on sports is a form of entertainment and should be about having a good time. But when done excessively, it may negatively affect other areas of a person's life, such as their physical and mental health, school or work performance, finances, and or interpersonal relationships. At Betmaker.com and The Betmaker Show, we're concerned about the addiction that gambling may cause, and for this reason, we encourage everyone to practice responsible gambling, an approach to gambling that helps you ensure that it remains an enjoyable activity. Here are the main principles of responsible gambling. Don't think of gambling as a way to make money. Always gamble with money that you can afford to lose. Set limits and stick to them. Never chase losses. Don't gamble when you're depressed or upset, and create a healthy balance. Always be aware of how much time you spend gambling or thinking about gambling. And do not allow gambling to cause you to miss out on time with family and friends or time spent on other activities you enjoy. By following these guidelines, gambling can be a good time and great entertainment. If you feel at any time that your gambling is taking away from important areas of your life, is causing you stress or depression, or is leading to financial losses that are beyond your control, please reach out for help. Learn more at responsiblegambling.org.